Friday, was it? Friday, I think it was on Instagram, yeah. So we'll just cover that off quickly here so it's all, safe and people can, look back at it. So obviously, there's a lot of considerations we need to think about as we're going through that process of pregnancy. And let's start kind of in that before we're pregnant sort of conception sort of time, and talk about nutrition, shall we, to start with? So like what considerations should you be kind of paying attention to before you actually get pregnant, or if you're looking to?
Okay, so if you're trying to get pregnant, making sure as much as you can that you're of a healthy weight is going to be really beneficial in terms of chance of conception, but also how successful the pregnancy itself will be. If you're really underweight or you're really overweight, it makes it harder to get pregnant in the first place, but then also increases the risk of something going wrong. So that's really, really important. And then other things to bear in mind is just making sure that you have a varied, balanced diet. So you're getting all of the nutrients that you need, particularly things like folic acid are important for if you're trying to get pregnant. And also that you're physically active. So that doesn't mean that you have to be training really hard all of the time, but that you're doing stuff on a regular basis to make sure that you are strong enough and fit enough to deal with the pregnancy, because it's quite hard being pregnant. And things that will make being pregnant easier is making sure that your lung capacity is decent and that your hips and your back are strong. Those things will make being pregnant more pleasant, I think.
Yeah, I think that's certainly it makes sense. And I think you tend to see people who have not kind of done or spent time kind of working through those issues. You probably would find that they kind of struggle a bit more, I think. But yeah, especially if you enjoy training, definitely keep training and try and stay as strong as you can. But also really, as Pennie said, just get as nice and mobile as you can, just so that as you kind of have to deal with sort of more load on the joints as we go through pregnancy, and also kind of increase like joint elasticity, basically, you're more able to support that. I think also from a nutrition standpoint, supplement wise, a kind of a good multivitamin probably is going to be helpful. Pregnancy specific one, just because we don't want to be having lots of vitamin A as we're going through. And also folic acid, 400 micrograms, I think for 3 months before and up to the end of the first trimester is widely recommended, just to reduce the kind of, I think it's neurotube defects that can kind of minimize the risk of. So that's something that's quite important.
And also vitamin D, which is important always anyway, but definitely one that you need to make sure that you're getting, especially because if you live in the UK, you don't really get that much sunshine. So for half of the year anyway, everyone needs to be supplementing with vitamin D.
Yeah. And then going kind of forwards onto, I guess, trimester 1 and onwards. So they're split into 13-week blocks. So one trimester, 1, 2, and 3. What are some of our considerations that we might need to think about when it comes to training, probably more than nutrition, but in our first?
Okay. So in your first trimester, physically, you'll be able to do most of the same things that you were doing before, but you might feel really sick really randomly throughout the day for the whole 13 weeks. So if you are suffering from morning sickness, just give yourself a chance in between doing stuff. So if you are still going to the gym, you don't need to keep the intensity really high. Just do a bit and then sit down for a little bit while your body calms itself back down before you try and do the next bit, so you don't end up firstly throwing up in the gym.
Yeah, that's never the one.
No, but secondly, like, you don't want to make yourself feel awful, so just be really patient with yourself and give yourself a chance to get stuff done without it feeling like hell on earth. But yeah, movement wise, you should still be able to do most of the same stuff that you were doing. I wouldn't start anything particularly new, apart from like basic stuff. So if you've not lifted, starting lifting in your first trimester will be fine, but just be sensible about it and make sure you're working with someone who can teach you how to do things well, because your ability to control your pelvis is going to be really important always anyway, but especially when you are pregnant, because you need to be able to hold that position of where your pelvis and where your rib cage is when you're doing stuff. So if you don't know how to do that, but then you start trying to lift things poorly, it's just not a very good idea.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good point. Yeah, if you've been training quite regularly beforehand, I think you'll be fine to kind of carry on as per, certainly for the first trimester. I mean, as you progress through, you'll probably find that your training load and volume has to decrease somewhat anyway. But if you're starting from a fresh kind of thing, if you suddenly thought, oh, I want to be in better shape to go through this, there's nothing wrong with starting, but it probably is better to kind of keep to your basics and just really get them nice and controlled, and just really focus on understanding how to move basically, and sort of how to control everything, so that as you do progress, you'll still be able to progress in the gym probably, but also you're going to have you're not going to be putting yourself at risk of injury, which is the last thing you want when your body is constantly changing and you're having to adapt to a bunch of other stuff as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say do mobility stuff frequently, particularly like hip mobility and thoracic spine mobility. And also every day, make sure you move through all of your range of motion through all of the joints, because as the pregnancy develops, you're going to find yourself sitting in a particular position for long periods of time, and you want to make sure that you can maintain your movement as much as you can. So even just doing maybe 10 minutes of something a day will be really beneficial for how good you feel as time passes.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's probably quite important to discuss is how it can affect your kind of mood and stuff like that. So when we're also, as you're going through, the hormones are going to probably be all over the shop and they're going to be changing constantly. So having that ability to adapt based on how you feel day to day is quite important. And this is where I think probably for most people generally, you're going to have good days and bad days, and don't if you're someone who likes training, especially, it can be quite difficult if you have a bad day in the gym, because you're kind of it's something that you enjoy, so it makes you feel worse. But I think it's something you're going to have to accept, that actually if you're going to have a bad day, that's fine. Just do what you can, and then just accept it and move on.
Yeah, for sure. Also, if you are feeling sick and taking your supplements makes you feel sick, you don't need to take them all in one go. And you could also, if there are things that can be broken, you can take some in the morning and some in the evening if that makes you feel less sick. So just maybe experiment with what works better for you, so you don't end up taking the supplement and then just throwing it up straight away.
Or food for that matter, probably. But yeah, so on the topic of like nutrition, I guess, and then let's talk about actually weight loss, and that sort of thing. What's your take on that in terms of you might, obviously people are going to go through a lot of change in this period. Weight will increase probably, body shape will change quite a lot, and then obviously towards the end of it, you're going to go through like essentially a massive trauma. So you're going to come out the other end of the pregnancy probably in a different shape to the way you went in. What's your kind of advice on that?
So I'd say while you're pregnant, try and just eat at maintenance. Don't try and diet, because you want to make sure that you have enough energy to grow the tiny human. You don't want to restrict how much you're getting and then risk the chance of not having enough to grow it. And also, if you're not eating enough, your body will take nutrients from you anyway to grow the baby, which is why it's important for you to take your vitamins. But secondly, just make sure that you're eating. This is not a time to diet. Any dieting you want to do it before. And then afterwards, again, try and just stick to around maintenance calories. This still isn't a time for you to be dieting, I don't think, especially because if you are not eating enough energy, your body will stop producing milk, because it's very energy consuming. And in fact, when you're breastfeeding, you'll need approximately like 600 and something extra calories a day just to feed the baby. So if you go straight away into trying to restrict your intake to try and get back to what your body was before, your body's gonna have to make adjustments, and normally what that will be is to stop producing milk because it's so energy consuming. I also think that so long as you focus on getting all of your vegetables, getting enough protein, getting enough fiber, moving regularly, and then just trying to maintain where possible, that will be the healthiest thing for you to do. And you can worry about dieting later if that's something that you want to do, but don't do it just because you think you're supposed to.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good point, especially off the back that you're probably going to have, I guess, 6 to 8 weeks as a minimum, where you're just going to need to recover and kind of get used to this new life. So actually having another stressor is probably like the last thing you need. Spend a bit of time kind of figuring out the lay of the land, I guess, and get the most important things in order first. And there's always plenty of time later for kind of dieting or whatever if you feel like you want to. I think there's probably quite an important point that we've sort of glossed over there when it comes to actually like being in pregnancy, in the sense of like you often hear people saying, "Oh, I need to eat more. I'm eating for two now," which is kind of a bit of a myth. I get where it comes from. Obviously, you're growing another human, but like in reality, I think it's the first 2 trimesters you don't actually need to eat any more at all. You're fine. And then the third one, maybe another, I think it's 200 calories a day, possibly, when you're in that kind of big growth phase. So that's just something to think about, and 200 calories really isn't a lot. It's like a fancy coffee or, toast and peanut butter, one slice, or maybe, probably a big banana might even do it, so it's really not a lot of extra food that you need. So just be aware of that actually, if you are in the mindset that you kind of need to eat more, you'll eat a lot more, and then you're probably actually going to overshoot by loads, and that could be detrimental in its own way.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Like, just be mindful of what you're doing, and in your second and third trimester, probably more third trimester, you're going to have all sorts of weird cravings, which, I mean, is up to you how you end up dealing with, but just be mindful of eating way too much, because then you'll end up with different problems later.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh no, go on. Did you want to add?
No, sorry, go on, Carol. No, it's fine.
I was going to say, in your second trimester, you're not going to feel sick anymore, probably, and you'll have like this burst of energy where everything is kind of great. Make the most of that, because then in your third trimester, you're just going to be really tired all of the time, especially because if your bump is quite high, it's going to end up squishing into your lungs. So then, like, walking around the block is going to be really tough, and that's going to be quite frustrating if you're someone who is usually quite fit and does long walks or runs or whatever on a regular basis. But again, just be patient with yourself, because what you're doing is really hard, so you just have to wait it out.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, again, it totally depends on the person, doesn't it? Some people, I've seen people training right up to almost the day of, but I think they're all people who have been training for quite some time prior. So they're very used to that. So definitely don't think you have to. I don't think you have to not either. You're probably the best judge of that, alongside your kind of doctor and midwife, I would suggest. And then sort of coming off the back of, I guess, postnatally, returning to exercise, that's again something that it will vary massively depending on, I guess, how traumatic the whole process was. Whether you had cesarean, whether you gave birth naturally, whether you had any complications. All that stuff's going to vary the amount of time that you take to heal, I suppose. And initially it's going to be a matter of probably just being able to kind of get back to walking comfortably again for the first few weeks, and then once you've had your sign off with the doctor and midwife and stuff, then it's probably the time to think about getting back into any sort of lifting style activities, I would say, because there might be some sort of physio intervention possibly in between, again depending on how the process went, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Like, be really gradual. Don't go straight back into doing what you were doing before you got pregnant as well. Like, if you were squatting and deadlifting 100 kilos, that should not be the first thing you do when you go back to the gym. Build up really, really slowly. As with anything, volume control really matters. And if in doubt, just ask someone who can help you. Like, it's really easy for you to return to training, and you will be able to do all of the things that you could do before. You just have to be really like systematic and graded in your approach, and be patient in that first bit, although you'll probably be too tired anyway from the baby keeping you awake all the time to really want to go back to the gym too soon. So that might be self-limiting.
But I think that's it. With that sort of thing, it's a matter of it's very individual. There's nothing, if someone's telling you you need to go and do this, you need to go and do that, I would say, you need to think about actually what do you want to do, and what do you feel able to do. It might be that actually just spending longer getting used to your new life is what you want. It might be that you want to jump back in the gym. Either's fine. There's no pressure on either way, I don't think.
Listen to yourself. You're the only one that.
Yeah, I certainly would try and avoid getting sucked into this whole, get your pre-pregnancy body back stuff, because firstly, the reality is that it might not be achievable anyway, because you've gone through such a big process. And then two, I think you're probably worth spending time just actually accepting that your I say new body, but your how you are now is actually kind of quite a good thing. It's quite an achievement, right? So if you see it like that, it's almost like people kind of worry about stretch marks, etc. But I think they're not a bad thing, are they?
Yeah, for sure. And like bodies change all the time anyway, like with pregnancy, but also with all sorts of other things.
And age full stop. Yeah
that's just how it goes. Like your body now does not look the same as it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it doesn't look the same as it will do in 5 years or 10 years. And it's a privilege to be able to get older, and it's something we should be grateful for, I think, because it's something not everybody gets to do. So holding on to this idea of what we looked like before, I think, is a waste of your potential happiness, because then you're upset about something you can't control.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
You can just be happy with where you are. Life's bad. You're happy with where you are.
But also, you can't do anything about it. So, you have no choice but to start where you are. You can't start where you were 10 years ago. It's just not possible. So, try and just accept it, I suppose. That sounds a bit gloomy, really, doesn't it? But it's not a bad thing.
I think it's a good thing. I think if you can be like grateful for where you are and what you have, that doesn't mean you can't want progress or to achieve other things, but it means that you're not wasting your life wishing you had something else. You can have both things can be true at the same time. You can be happy with what you have, and you can also want to work for something else. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. You can't. Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is there anything? I was going to say, is there anything else that you'd like to discuss with regards to that, or?
I would just say, if you are breastfeeding, make sure that you're drinking lots of fluids, so water, milk, etc. If you're drinking alcohol, don't feed the baby for like 2 or more hours, because it will pass through your milk, and then you might end up with a drunk baby, and I don't know how much fun that will be for you.
I'll probably sleep more.
Maybe. So then equally the same with caffeine, right? If you have a coffee, don't then immediately feed the baby, because then you'll have a hyper baby. If you want to have alcohol or caffeine, you can just buy pumps. So then you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and as we discussed the other day as well, kind of any medications you're taking as well, make sure you check that out before you breastfeed as well, just because it can have an impact on the baby sometimes. So it's just worth thinking about.
Yeah, definitely something to your doctor about.
Yeah, speak to doctor, pharmacist about that. They'll be able to help you. And what's the thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, generally speaking, obviously it's going to depend on the person, but yeah, when it comes to breastfeeding, you're looking for kind of ideally 6 months plus is generally deemed as the healthier option if possible. I know it's getting a bit medical now, but that is generally kind of what's deemed as the most appropriate if you can. Obviously, if you can't, then there's not really a lot you can do about that. But I think it's the advice would be to try where possible. Um, Again, it's personal choice, but that's just what the sort of medical community advises.
Yeah, like do whatever you can, but if you can keep breastfeeding, you may as well. But do what's right for you.
Yeah. But otherwise, I think that's all I certainly have to say on those topics. Anything that you'd like to add
No,
to
I
those?
think that's all of the things for today.
Good.
If anyone would like to ask questions about any of those things, pop them below and we can answer
Yeah,
them later.
lob comments down, and I'll be able to answer them later. I'll also just write a little timestamp of when we started talking about the pre-post narrative stuff, so people can just jump to that if they want. Otherwise, yeah, we'll be doing another one next Sunday at 10. We'll talk about our supplements then, I think, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Plus whatever we've covered in the week next week, which we haven't decided yet. But if you want to find out, join us on Instagram, 6 o'clock in the evening, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we will be having a chat about those.
Yes, have a wonderful day.
Yep. See you
See you
later.
later.